Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're doing something a little unexpected this episode. As I knew would happen at some point, my beloved 94-year-old mother died this week. And as a result, we're going to run a wonderful episode from season 2 featuring the fabulous storyteller Shannon Cason. But tune in next time for a brand new episode, which will be filled with mama spirit. Thanks for understanding. And remember, this is no time to be timid.
Hi, I'm Shannon Cason. I'm a writer and storyteller. I tell stories on stages, on pages, and on my podcast, Shannon Cason's Homemade. And I'll tell you, this is no time to be timid.
Hey there, I'm Trisha Rose Burt, and in this podcast, we talk to artists who show us how to find the courage to take risk, step out of our comfort zones, and use our creativity to make our work and change our world. Pay close attention because this is no time to be timid. Welcome to the show. In this episode, we talk with Shannon Cason, one of the best storytellers I've ever heard, and I've heard a lot of storytellers, and host of the podcast Homemade Stories. Shannon is a master of the craft, and he's been on some of the most exciting stages, Snap Judgment, TEDx, and of course the Moth, where he and I shared a stage back in 2016. I've been following him and his work ever since, and I just couldn't wait to bring him on the show. I asked Shannon what he thought was the most important trait in sustaining a creative practice, and he said, perspective. The attitude a person brings to their work and their life, and how they handle the rough patches that come their way. And Shannon has had his fair share of rough patches, but with incredible wit and wisdom, he's turned them into works of art that continue to change people's lives. I'm so delighted you're tuning in. Hey, Shannon. It's so great to have you on the show.
I'm glad to be here. Glad to talk to you all the time. So, yeah, good to hear from you.
Okay, so I have been listening to all things Shannon Cason to prepare for this show, which has just been a complete and total delight. And it's all I can do not to just run the whole story. But you have a piece called Late Bloomer that you put on YouTube. And I'm going to do a quote from Late Bloomer, and then I want you to expound on it a bit.
My creative life didn't start till my mid-30s either. The seed was planted early, but it was in a small flower pot, and it wasn't until I was replanted into the bigger garden of Chicago that I really grew roots and sprang up out of the ground. And I'm still growing, even though it's late. That's why I always encourage young people to go, do something, somewhere else as early as possible. Get away from home. Don't wait. Start early.
I really encourage all of my listeners to go to Shannon Cason's YouTube page. There are things that get flashed up in the middle of watching the YouTube story, and in the middle of the Late Bloomer story, there's a list of everyone who did things later in life. And at the end, it was like Abraham and Sarah had a baby really, really old, which just made me crack up laughing. It was very funny. As someone who didn't get in creative work until I was in my mid-30s as well, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about how you even got into storytelling in the first place.
I'm from Detroit originally. So it's like amazing creativity in Detroit. From music to, arts to, all kinds of different creativity, because I think where you see a lot of struggle, you'll see creativity as well, because the human spirit got to get out in some way. If it's some struggle, it's going to get out in a whole lot of different ways. So Detroit, Motown, going way back, into gospel and all those things, some of the greatest artists, a lot of different areas, but you'll see certain hotbeds around the country, and Detroit is definitely a hotbed of creativity. And for me, Detroit was the creative heart of everything I do. Like, that's where my creativity kind of sprang from. the times in Detroit living with grandma and seeing my dad and mom and sister and all that kind of stuff. But then when you're in something, it's hard to kind of like express it in a way. So when I moved to Chicago, and we can get into, the all the different intricate stuff that go into that move, but at the same time, when I moved here in Chicago, I didn't feel constrained by just my life. It was like more so like, okay, this is a time to share what I've been through. And Chicago has so many different spaces to do it. Like Chicago is like the incubator city where comedy, improv, even storytelling, and all these things, literary. People come to Chicago and they kind of become the artists that they're going to be before they go to New York or
Mhm.
LA. So a lot of comedians come, they spent their time in Chicago kind of growing, and then they go to New York and LA and they spring up. But for me, Chicago was like a space where, dang, I can be artistic. In Detroit, it's like the work of life. In Chicago, it's more like I can show what I've worked on. Yeah.
One of the first stories of yours I ever heard was you telling the story, "It's like borrowing," about when you were a bank manager and, had a little hiccup at the bank. I'm gonna let you tell about that experience and then say how you got on stage telling that story.
Yeah, well, okay, so like I say, Detroit was like the work of life. So gambling addiction. Always had it when I was young. From back when I was in high school, we would flip quarters or pitch them against the wall and stuff like that. And I would be really into it. We would shoot craps in college. I went to Michigan State University, and we would lose a lot of money. I mean, a lot, relatively to us. If you lose $200 and you're a college student, that that was might have been your check for the whole week. That gambling addiction for me was kind of held at bay for a while I was really heavily involved in the church that I was in. But then when I kind of left the church for whatever reason, I ended up going back to gambling, and I worked at a bank. So working at a bank and gambling is not the best mixture. Me being a manager at the bank, with all this access to all the money. What it was a lascivious thought. Lasciviousness is when you let your mind just go unrestrained. And I let my mind go unrestrained thinking about the money in the vault. And I was like, I can just play around with this money. It's not, and eventually those thoughts become reality. So I always watch my thoughts on certain things. And I took $50,000 and I lost it at the casino during my lunch hour in Detroit. That was a changing point in my life because I was always kind of a good kid, the good kid, the kid that got good grades,
Mhm.
graduated college, the first one in my family, and all these other things. So being in trouble for embezzlement was huge. Now the thing with storytelling, when I got into storytelling, like all these experiences in life, that experience, divorce experiences that coming up and how we grew up, I allowed myself the creative freedom just to be honest. I call it brutally honest. Be brutally honest about myself, being vulnerable about those stories. It takes time to tell a story like that because you have to think and you have to adjust and think like, okay, if I tell this story, it pretty much commits you to the arts because you can't really can't take the story back.
Not gonna go into retail banking after that.
Yeah, you're not going back into banking again or investing or nothing like that. So the thing is, I told the story, and really the intention in telling the story was helping others. So having an intention
Yeah.
behind the story of letting others know that they're not alone. Because I did lose a friend. I don't know if it was to gambling, but also I know the feelings and thoughts that I had during that time frame, thinking that life is over, and it's not. It wasn't at all. So, yeah.
So, but when was the first time you got on a stage to tell a story?
First time I got on stage to tell a story would have been at the Martin Luther King Library at I think it's 45th on Michigan Avenue, 45th in Chicago. And they had like a writers program, and I wrote a story and I read it, and I kind of liked it. I like doing that. Yeah. Other than that, I may have told stories back when I was a kid and stuff like that, but that was the first like modern time of telling stories.
Yeah, but now what you do for a living is you're a storyteller. Well, in addition to running a podcast and workshops and everything else that you do, but really that's who you are. But I want to know, like, what did it feel like the very first time to be brave enough to step up and say, I'm going to tell this story? And what story did you tell?
I had moved to the north side of Chicago, and it was this they had all these little, like I say, Chicago is like an incubator city. They have all these little spots to storytelling, improv, comedy, literary scene, all these different scenes, poetry, slam poetry was started here. So all these things going on. And this one lady named Dana Norris, she had a thing called Story Club, and I remember I saw it. Me and my girlfriend at the time, we was walking, and I saw this little flyer said Story Club, people reading and writing, and I had started writing these stories. So I went to that, and I had a story called My Father's Camera. It was a fictional story, basically. Now it reads like it's a true story. And at the end, I'm on the south side of Chicago in a neighborhood, and I'm taking pictures of people, and somebody comes up to me and say, you know, why are you taking pictures over here? Kind of like in my face, and that's the end of the story. So, and I still tell that story to this day. Like that's one of my first stories, and I still tell that story. My father left me his camera. It was in a boxy aluminum case with two latches in the front that locked. It also had latches on the side that didn't lock. To unlock it, you have to get your fingernail under the little notches of the combination wheel and flick them to 7 and 7 and one more 7. Then get your fingers under the levers and pull. Then the latches would loosen and you could open it. The side levers, just get your finger under those, no combination.
I love the whole idea of just, being mid-30s and jumping in and seeing a flyer and just going to it. If you had ignored that thing in the inside of you that said, go tell that story, we would all be worse off. But you in particular, did it occur to you not to answer that flyer? Did you think twice, oh, maybe I won't? Or were you like, finally, thank Jesus, I can go up and start telling a story now?
I had attitude, right? So I had attitude to what I do. And
Yeah.
it comes from playing sports. It comes from, like, in Detroit, I was big into the hip hop community. So all these things is the attitude that I approach it with. So when I was telling that story, like the first stories, My Father's Camera, when I go on stage or, coffee shop microphone, it's almost as though I was meant to be there. I always looked at comedians like open mic comedians, and I tried comedy for a little bit, but they would be looking at their feet or looking at the paper or a little nervous. I'm not saying I don't feel nerves, but if I'm going to do it, I'm all in. You get what I'm saying? And that's just how
I
even
do.
all in, I took $50,000. If I'm going to do it, hey, why take 1,000? Go to just grab it all out of the set. So I'm more like it was funny because the first time I told a story at the Dana Norris Story Club, and we're good friends now, I went up there and she thought I was somebody. She like, well, can I get you back to come back
Oh.
to the story? I'm like, well, this is my first time telling the story. But I'm going with that kind of demeanor when I'm doing the thing. And I just always looked at that and I said, why the person looking at their feet? Why don't they just do it instead of um, pulling back? So I've always kind of had that attitude.
I love that I'm meant to be here. and I think that's such an interesting way to navigate, to say, I'm even if I'm just like you were brand new doing this, it's like, I'm supposed to be doing this. I'm supposed to stand up here and tell this story. And I think it's really powerful not to wait for permission and go all in. I mean, it's really a powerful thing for our listeners to hear, particularly those who are just trying to get themselves going with it. And those of us who are trying to get into a new medium or something like that, just go all in and do it. So tell me a little bit about your creative process. When you want to make something, what does it look like for you?
You know, I think some things are gifts and some things are learned, or it's a mixture of all of it. For me, I do have a good memory of feelings, and I feel those things. I trust the feelings that I had during certain moments in my life when I woke up as a kid and my mom and dad were arguing and I'm yelling at my dad to leave my mom alone. You know what I'm saying? I can see those things and I can feel them and I can put them in paper. So those are one of the things that I think kind of just is a gift. And what I do to kind of find those stories is just remember those moments, and a lot of times those moments will come back to me on certain things, like it'll be a serendipitous thing or a deja vu. Like I'll see something and it'll remind me, and I'll say, "Oh, talk about when my mom broke her arm at my baptism," you know, and all the details that kind of went into that. And one of the things that I know will happen will be someone else will remember these moments in their life, because a lot of those things are relatable, and we've all had some experiences that are similar. They're not the same, but they're very similar, relationship wise, feeling wise, the expressions, the things we feel on the inside. And I'll just try to explain them honestly from my point of view, but my intention is for others to kind of go into their mind and think about the experiences that they had as well that may be similar to that, you know.
As we all know, the more specific you get, the more universal the story becomes. And it's like, you just hit that out of the park every time, Shannon.
That means a
Every
lot. That
time.
means a lot. But I do know that that's definitely something that I hone in on and I respect, like my own intuition. I respect my
Mm.
experiences that I'm going through, and I try to be honest with myself about it. What am I truly feeling? If I'm disgusted, tell that, because I think that honesty will shine through more than me just saying what I think everybody wants to hear. Like if we're going through divorce and the other person's bad and I'm the good one. But no, if I can tell the story, if I really feel like I'm the bad one, I'm just kind of
Yeah.
tell that story, and
Yeah.
people may not
Yeah.
like you in the story, but if we be honest with ourselves as the listener, as the audience, as whoever, you'd be like, I've done some bad things too, or I can relate to that feeling of wanting to be a better father, a better husband, those things, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I would encourage all of the listeners to look at your TEDx talk, which is really kind of underscoring what you're talking about right now. It's called A Simple and Honest Story, and it's a really fantastic sort of overview on what makes a story good and why you would tell a story in the first place. It's that vulnerability.
And this is the most important point I make, is if you're struggling in life, and somebody here is, if you feel like you're failing at everything, you can't win for losing, your honesty about it may be your way out. The bigger your failures, the better your story. Now, if you can harness and channel that story, it could affect millions, possibly change your life, maybe even change the world.
We'll get back to the second half of our conversation in a moment, but right now I want to tell you about our sponsor, Interrobang Books, a Dallas-based independent bookstore with a terrific online collection. At Interrobang, their dedicated staff of book enthusiasts will guide you on your search for knowledge and the excitement of discovery. Shop their curated collection online at interrobangbooks.com. That's Interrobang, INTERABANG, books.com. Well, what's interesting is you have a very interesting blend, Shannon, of just being so vulnerable, but there's humor that gets laced through your stories as well, which can kind of be a reprieve, when you're in that space of profundity. Do you write your thoughts down on a notebook? Do you come home and put them all on a computer? Do you just keep them in your head? Like, what does it look like for you?
Yeah, creative process. I use the same notebook, the same pens that I use for everything.
Yeah.
And then I use my phone a lot, my notes in my phone, because ideas will come as I'm kind of going through life and normal things, even when I'm hanging out with different people. But I'll take a note just to remember, to jog my memory. And I keep a file in my notes, called ideas.
Yeah.
And sometimes I go to those, or they'll be nagging me, and I'll write it from there. I've started writing stuff on my whiteboard as well, like stories that I may want to work on at some point. So I do keep a lot of notes. It's not any kind of, well, it may be organized. It's organized from my standpoint. And everything I do is, I like a list. I'm a list person. I use lists pretty much in every single way possible, even with my storytelling, my creativity. Stories, I'll start the story with outlines. I used to just start a story, but I noticed that those will take so long to write. But if I outline it, which can be a rough outline of saying, I get my dad's camera. I try to play around with some ideas. I put the camera away. I go around the city, and it ends on the south side of Chicago. I'll just kind of outline
Yeah.
those 5 things, and then I'll see where that story takes me from the outline. So I do outline as well, and that's my process.
When you're on stage, do you memorize anything, or are you just riffing?
Everything is memorized to the T.
Yeah.
So in that memorization I have a process for that. So I'll read the story. I'll try to tell the story into the microphone, and then listen to it on the microphone. And it's the one thing that I do. I know I had a story if I can write the story out. Now, that depends on how long it is. I remember, like, you listened to that TEDx.
Mm-hmm.
I was writing that story down, or the TEDx down, the whole speech, writing it, longhand in my notebook, and just writing it all out right before I had to go on stage. I was trying to finish it because I know if I can write it, I got it. It's in my head.
Yeah.
And once I have it totally memorized, now I can play around with the audience a little bit, especially if I'm doing it the second or third time, because I do audience participation. So I will go off script and play with the audience some, and then go back on script. So I love to have it totally memorized in that way.
I do the same thing. I have it in
Yeah.
my DNA. If a story's in my DNA, then I can just do whatever I want to it when I'm on stage and respond
Yeah.
better to the audience.
No doubt. But I say this, like, I look at stories as songs. So because I used to do hip hop, so we used to put all these 1,000 different demo songs together in basements and in Detroit in the 90s, uh, late 80s to the late 90s and even into 2000s. So we would do all these songs, and you wanted the mood to the song. The culture then was the hip hop shop, St. Andrews, these kind of like iconic places now. Eminem made movies about it. People making TV shows about Jay Dilla and his legacy in hip hop. So all these things were like, these were the people who I was kind of coming up around, and we were seeing each other doing the hip hop thing. So when I do music, you got to memorize a rhyme, right? So you memorize a rhyme, and when you say the rhyme, you don't say it as though a memorized rhyme.
Yeah.
You say the rhyme from your heart and from your spirit and from uh, a certain attitude that you may have with it. So in the same way I did that, I do my stories. I memorize the story, but when I'm saying the story, I'm saying it with timing.
Mhm.
I've heard some things about my timing, but that's from music. So
Yeah.
so those things all come along with that training in hip hop as well.
Okay, this is a fantastic segue into what you're doing on YouTube right now. I can get really nervous about adopting new media. I mean, you were the one that held my hand and said, "Go to the podcast convention, Trisha. Go to the podcast convention." Because I'm like, do I do that now? I mean, so you were so integral in helping me just feel more comfortable in doing this as a medium. But you have this great quote: "Don't let these youngins get too far away from us. Plug into the new stuff or the latest stuff." And I just cracked up. It was like, you're right. You were right. For a lot of us, it's like, seems so unreachable. Talk about how you finally stepped into that world of saying, okay, yeah, I'm going to get on TikTok. I'm going to do these stories. I'm going to talk about that.
Can't let everything get so far away from us, and we got to kind of stay with the now. We don't want to be the ones wearing pleated pants might be back in somewhat, but we don't want to be the one doing stuff from the standpoint of being, dinosaurs in a sense. So when I look at things like TikTok, and I wish, it's always 2020, I wish I was looking at what my daughter was doing and probably, but I always thought, that's for the kids, but the one thing was just finding my lane within it. So, cause I know I'm not going to be dancing. I'm not going to be doing too many, like weird things. If I can find a way to do storytelling within these platforms. And I saw a friend of mine named Aaron Califato, right? He does a
Mhm.
podcast called 7 Minute Stories. And he had been playing around with YouTube and Instagram and these things. And then one day I looked at his thing and it had like 700,000 views on one of his shorts. And it was just him telling a story about his granddad wanting dandelion salad at a restaurant and remembering that his mother used to make that when they didn't have much money. They'd go out in the yard and pick dandelions and they cook them, and they had dandelion salad or something like that. And it 700,000 became 2 million, and 2 million became 6 million, and then it was 10 million, and then it kept going, and it was 15 million people had saw that simple little 1 minute story
Wow.
about his granddad. And I was like, I could do that. If he telling stories, I don't have to dance. I was like, he got 15 million from stories. And I told him, I said, hey, because actually he followed a lot of my stories. So I was like, hey, I'm gonna follow your lead in this. And he was like, have at it, Shannon. I appreciate your stories. So I started telling like the 1 minute stories,
Mm.
and I saw traction within those. In telling 1 minute stories, I like the economy of it. If we love writing and storytelling, and we find it a challenge to have economy of words. So using that love of writing and literature, I have that kind of mindset to the TikToks and the Instagram reels and the YouTube shorts. And then I want to broaden that to be able to bring the stories that we tell on stage, and then on our podcast, to take those stories to the YouTube audience as well. And I'm still tweaking it and learning, but I know it'll grow because the stories, like we said earlier on, they are universal, and they will, and it's a lot of storytelling. I watch Swoozy. Swoozy is I think he got probably 10 million subscribers, but he tells stories and little cartoons that go along with them. But storytelling lives on YouTube and all these platforms as well.
How did you come up with, I'm going to do a 1 minute story about what day of the week you would be, and I'm going to be a Tuesday and explain why you're not the other days of the week? It's brilliant.
I think all of our ideas are kind of like appropriation. Like we can take them from somewhere else,
Yeah.
right? So you say you were painting in the past. Some of the things, or you still paint probably, but some of the things you painted at the time in school are stories, right?
Uh-huh.
So you can kind of take some of the old stuff and make it newer again.
Yeah.
Like I haven't told my gambling story on YouTube yet, but it'll eventually become something on YouTube.
Uh-huh.
If it's a series, I haven't told any. Well, I told some of my church stories, but I'll think of those and I'll say, okay, let me do a series on those, or some of the music stories, and want to do a series on those. So the Tuesday story, I've always just thought that. Like I've always liked Tuesdays. Like Fridays and Saturdays always felt too much nervous energy. I'm an introvert. I'm kind of like, I don't like any anxiousness, anxiety bother me on certain things. So I'm like, oh, it's Friday night, I gotta go crazy. I'm like, but Tuesdays, and it's this song, like it's going up on a Tuesday with Drake and all that kind of stuff. So I relate to that song. I'm like, yeah, if I go out on a Tuesday, I can walk around. If I'm going to a party or something, it's not as crowded as a
Yeah,
Friday or
yeah, yeah.
Saturday. It's more my vibe. This is more the loungy, chill Tuesday. It's not Monday. Monday suck. It's Tuesday. Tuesday, okay. I like eating tacos. So when I think about Tuesday, I'm thinking like that's a good day. And then striving to be a Thursday one day.
Yeah.
Thursdays are
That's what
special.
just cracked me
Yeah,
up.
yeah. Striving to be a Thursday. Yeah.
What I love about the work you do is it's so based in the everyday. The stories become profound, but they're really about just like what I'm looking at every day. That's why that late bloomer story was so beautiful, because you're watching this man tend to this garden, and it becomes this obvious metaphor, but it was just the details of the everyday of watching this man work.
Hmm.
So I think that that's, as an artist, I don't have to wait for this gigantic lightning bolt of an idea. I just have to look
Yeah,
at what's in front of me, and then
that's a good point.
just notice. I just need to notice, and all of us, if we're wondering how to get started, just notice. That's what you're masterful at.
No, that's a great point there to notice. Yeah, I love that. Hmm.
Okay, so Shannon, tell me, how do you get through those rough patches? How do you keep yourself fueled to keep going?
For me, the rough patches are the actual fuel. That
Mm.
is the raw material for storytelling. The hard things of life. Nobody wants to hear the everything went perfect and I made it, and now we're closing in on uh 10 million, and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
there's no cares in the world even with this. I mean, you can have a lot in its rough patches. You get what I'm saying? So it's like those are the things that fuel stories for me. When I see, not saying things go bad, but when I see like challenges, when I see heartbreak, or man, dating is different when you're older now and you've been divorced 2 times and you got 2 kids, and explaining what you do for work may be interesting. You don't want to really talk about that. Those are the things that make good storytelling for me, because I know I'm not the only one in that predicament.
Mhm.
And when I do a story on it, I know I'm not going, or somebody's going to relate to it, or it's going to explain some kind of life that somebody else isn't living. They may aspire to, or they may hope that they never fall into. So those are the things, like those challenges are the things that make good stories for me. Like that's the thing that I'm looking for. If I just stay in my house and nothing happens really, um it's hard to find stories in that, even though it might be a story in that as well. But I like the challenges in a sense. I like the those trying times, and that's what I find too when I'm interviewing. Like I do interviews, and I try to well, I create podcasts for other companies or organizations, and when I'm doing that, I want that out of the person that I'm interviewing.
Yeah.
I want to find out what challenges they have. Like a lot of times people have answers that they're used to giving and they want to, promote their business. But I'm trying to find those things where is this the 10th business, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and that I think is more interesting than we're closing in on 1 billion this year. I think being the 10th business is more interesting. And then when you
Absolutely.
hear they're closing in on 1 billion, it's like, wow. And the person who's in that second business, they can listen to it and be like, oh, you know, I'm
Yeah.
on that road. I'm on the road.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one of the things we're trying to do with this podcast is say, we all didn't just come out of the womb being artists and we know exactly what we're doing. And it's such a clear road ahead of us. It's like, there's a lot of uncertainty in this. And we're just, this is how we make it happen. And this is what we do. And anything is material and we turn it into a story and put it back out there. What are you working on right now that scares you?
I'm leaning into homemade stories, thinking that I have to do something different. Homemade stories I started back in 2010, and that's been, what was that, 13 years now. So I'm leaning into that instead of doing a bunch of other different things,
That's
because I had
interesting.
ideas that I have to switch it up, or I have to become a crime fiction podcast, or do these other true crime stuff. But I'm leaning into the homemade stories. So with YouTube, those
Yeah.
those reels that you're seeing, also being more consistent with my podcast. I get a lot of interest from the podcast. Like people are like, it has a small cult following in that sense, but at the same time, I get a lot of different business from it as well. So just leaning into the podcast and into the brutally honest storytelling, it's been my focus. And consistency is the thing that that probably scares me more than anything. Just being consistent instead of uh, uh, so so haphazard. Just sticking to a system and staying on schedule is the thing that I'm really working on.
Man, you and me both. I mean, it is because the good news is we're artists and we're in charge of our time, and the bad news is we're artists and we're in charge of our time.
Exactly. Yeah.
I just love your stories. I just love your stories, and I love the work that you're doing. There's not only a sense of recognition in your stories, but there also feels like healing in them and hope in them, and that's a good thing to be putting out in the world these days.
That's a beautiful thing to hear, because that's the intention.
Good.
That's the intention. And the same with you. I do feel like uh, a friendship,
Mhm.
and I'm happy that a friendship that we have together, that we can talk about creative things. And it's like this, it's like a understanding,
Yeah.
someone who understands, because we haven't, from the sense of whatever hit it big means. I don't know what the hit it big things mean, but sometimes I just feel like I'm doing what I'm meant to do, and everything else will take care of
Yeah.
itself in some ways. Now, not saying that I don't have to, step one, step two, step three, but at the same time, I do feel like I'm in the right spot. So
Mhm.
when I wrote that story, Late Bloomer, I've been that way forever. It's not something new. When I was 6 years old, I may have been late at some of the things that the other 6-year-olds were at. So as a storyteller, at 47, I feel like, oh, I'm right in my stride. I'm still growing, and I feel like I'm, right at the point I'm supposed to be in certain ways, of course. But I feel like we relate in a lot of ways, and then
Mhm.
our creative conversations always fuel me. And I love our differences, and I love our similarities as well. I think that it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, same here. The common ground. I tell you,
Yeah.
creativity gives you all kinds of common ground.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Shannon. We're going to have you back to get an update, but thank you so much for coming.
Most definite. Most definite. I love being here.
Great. Thanks. I could spend hours talking and listening to Shannon. He inspires me, and he leaves me with a better perspective on my work and my life. He also gets me thinking. Here's some questions for us to ponder. First, what's your attitude when you approach your work? Are you looking at your feet, or are you all in? Second, what are everyday things that you notice that might inform your work? And last, how do you handle the rough patches? Can they be fuel for your creative life? Make sure to check out the show notes for links to some of Shannon's stories and follow him on Instagram and YouTube at Shannon Cason. Subscribe to his podcast too, Homemade Stories. Thanks for joining us. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at podcast@trishroseburt.com. And if you liked this episode, please share it with one other person that you think will enjoy it. Then maybe talk to them about the parts that resonate. It really helps build our audience. And remember, this is no time to be timid. No Time to Be Timid is written and produced by me, Trisha Roseburt. Our episodes are produced and scored by Adam Arnone of Echo Finch. And our executive producers are Amy Grant, Nancy Perot, and Sage Wheeler. I'd also like to thank contributors to my Fractured Atlas fiscal sponsorship, which helps make this podcast happen. No Time to Be Timid is a presentation of I Will Be Good Productions.
You can change yourself and change the world. It's no time to be timid if you haven't